Good evening and welcome to another Andy and Ollie show. I am Andy. I am in the UK. Ollie is somewhere in the English Channel, or not quite yet, between
Yeah.
Spain and the UK. Ollie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. It's a bit choppy.
The
And we
weather
might,
or the weather or the line?
I don't know. I don't know. How do I sound? Am I sounding all right?
You sound better than normal, to be fair. Stay away.
Oh, oh, Brittany Ferries, come on. It's doing me some good. It's got some good Wi-Fi.
But we should, most importantly, we should introduce our wonderful guest this week. We have the wonderful co-founder of none other than Paso Primero. Tom, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being part of what is the debacle. No, sorry, the great podcast of Andy and Ollie, where we get to speak about all things wine and lots of other things as well, generally, as you've
Well,
probably guessed already.
thanks for having me. The internet in Shrewsbury is probably worse than the internet on a ferry in Santander. So I apologise if I sound choppy as well.
Nope, you're coming through beautifully. And so, Tom, I guess like if we could, what we normally do is we asked for our guests to sort of introduce themselves, obviously a bit more about Paso Primero, give us the story. If those that haven't been to paso-primero.com to see Tom's basically beautiful film of a vineyard, and you haven't seen anything like it than Tom's version, then please get on there because it's brilliant. It makes me chuckle every time I go on there, Tom. But if yeah, in your own words, if you wouldn't mind, sort of how did you get into this? What is Paso Primero? And we'll go from there if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing I struggle with. I do a lot of tastings and do a lot of events, and trying to condense 18 years of history into a bite-sized chunk is always tricky. But I guess the broad strokes are: I am from Shrewsbury. I'm not making wine in Shrewsbury. I'm making wine in a region called Somontano in the Spanish Pyrenees. And I got there through fair means or foul, begging, stealing, and borrowing. I stumbled into wine because I was kicked out of university and had to get a job like good people should. And I took a job in the local wine merchants. If I happened to be in pretty much any other town in the Midlands, I think the story would have ended there. But I took a job stacking shelves and sweeping floors at Tanner's Wines. And that happens to be my local wine merchant. And they happen to be one of the most prestigious wine merchants in the UK, and if not the world. And I just suddenly had this new world opened up to me where wine went from being three for a tenner from Tesco's, that glorious Banrock station that proliferated the shelves for so long. No offense to Banrock station producers. Um, but I suddenly realized this product was something special, and I'm still in raptures with it, still astounded that there's such variety in a product that's ostensibly from the same ingredients. And I was set on a path to trying to figure out how it was done, how it was made. Obviously, I didn't stick around at Tanner's for too long. I stayed there for a couple of years selling wine. Then, like all good English budding winemakers, I ended up at Plumpton and darkening the doors of Chris Foss and Tony Milanowski and trying to find my way into wine through them. 2 years there turned into 3 years, the full viticulture and enology program. I caught the bug for the cellar, caught the bug for making wines. And off the back of that, went off, traveled around the world, spent a couple of harvests in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, spent 3 or 4 harvests in Ontario, in Canada, all the time dreaming of making my own wines in my own style with my own label on the front. And at the time, thought that was very possible. At the time, thought nothing was going to get in my way. We'd had nothing but yeses all along our wine route, so we just thought, let's go for it. Let's pick where we want to be, go and find someone who's willing to join us on this adventure. And at the time, we thought it'd be nice and easy to live in the UK and work in Europe and use all those lovely links between the two. We wanted to make old world wines, or at least go and study at the hand of people who'd made old world wines. And Spain was calling. Spain was a passion. Spain was somewhere I'd been. The wines had always ticked all our boxes. And we packed up from Canada, I came over to Shrewsbury for a few weeks, filled a van with a tent and a few camp chairs and a gas stove, and drove to Spain without a return date, and went knocking on doors looking for a winery that'd be willing to let us make wines in their facility using their kit. And the idea being we would help them make their wines, be an assistant winemaker or something for an existing winery, and then in the after hours make my own wines. But not realizing that the wine industry in Spain is a bit more of a closed loop system than the New World. They're family run places. They don't hire people outside of the family. They don't have new hires because their cousin comes and does this, or their uncle does that, or so it was tricky to get started. We really struggled to find our feet. We were in Somontano. We'd earmarked that as the place we wanted to be. And then in the great Hollywood moment, the caveat that pushes the plot line too far for the people watching the movie of my life, we had one meeting left. We were pretty much packed up, ready to leave Somontano, and had this last meeting. And that 1 hour chat turned into an 8 hour Spanish lunch with far too many wines than sensible for driving home afterwards. And the rest is history. They got the bug with us. They knew what we were trying to do and said, come on, make that wine. If you can sell that wine, you can come back and make another wine. And that was 8 years ago. First wine sold out within 6 months. And we now have this whole process of regeneration and saving indigenous varieties and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in Somontano. And we found our calling. That's our home, and that is where Paso Primero HQ is for our winemaking operations.
Incredible.
That's incredible.
That's a pretty good bite-sized story. I mean,
There's a lot of
we could essentially just leave it there, Tom. That was a mic drop moment where it was just like, and mic drop. I mean, Ollie, that's basically like saying to us, so, and what have you done in your life? That's what Tom's just done there. He's just gone, and we've just gone, wow, okay.
I'm trying. Give me some time.
You've got to be the heady mix. Sorry, you've got to be the heady mix of naive and stupid and optimistic. If you can blend all those, then anything's possible.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. It's amazing. It's such an incredible story. I think we all wish we'd got a story like Paso Primero, certainly. And it takes an awful lot of guts as well. I guess as well. You sort of threw yourself out there, made sure that you were going to try and make a thing of it. And as you say, Spain is not the easiest place to make that happen as well. And certainly post, as we know from what's happened in the UK and Europe afterwards, making it subsequently harder, I'm sure. I mean, in terms of the amount of time that you spend over in Spain versus the UK, are you typically over in Spain towards harvest season each year and then come back again, or is it more sort of depends on what's happening with the grapes, obviously themselves, but also I'm sure you're in constant communication with the winery as well?
Well, it's become it's changed a bit. Every vintage it's changed a little bit. Basically, as the relationship with the parent winery has improved, aligned, we're basically family, thick as thieves. And those first vintages, it was very much, this is my tank of Paso in the corner, hidden away. Like, I've tried not to mess anything up. I just used my little bit of juice and get on with it, and please help me send it to the UK and I won't bother you again. And now it's, we're making collaboration wines. All our top tier wines have both our names on. The project is only possible with both our inputs and all of our inputs, everyone who's involved in their winery, because they're a going concern, right? They make and sell wine in Spain, and they didn't have distribution outside of Spain when I got in there. So we had a good opportunity to work with them and help them. And we never really thought that we'd be working on saving indigenous varieties together and implementing a regenerative approach to organics in their vineyards. But that alignment has allowed me to have more freedom to be away from Spain. Over the last 3 years, certainly the COVID year was the first one where I went out for harvest and stayed for 2 months, because that was a big period of change for us. We went from we started with quite commercial wines because they're easier to market, easier to sell, better price points, a good way to start a business. Now we're into more nuanced wines that take a little bit more effort, a bit more care, and a bit more day-to-day practices. So they take longer in the cellar. And when we were changing from the commercially driven process into a more esoteric process, that's when I needed to be on site for the duration of that harvest. With young kids at home in Shrewsbury and a wife suddenly becoming a single mum, that's tough COVID was particularly tough because I couldn't have a return ticket. We didn't even know if I was going to make it down through France, to be honest. It was madness. But so we've had sort of three years of big extended periods for harvest where I'm on site doing everything from grape receival right through to barrel selections. Well, the usual harvest work, and then I'll go back out in October. Sort of to see out the end of harvest and start making maturation decisions. And then my favorite time of the year is January. Go out to Spain for a week or so every January when there's no time pressure, no one's around, and it's just taste the cellar. And that's when we start blending. That's when we start bringing everything together. That to me is, harvest does tend to be a bit procedural at times. I mean, there are obviously inputs from the winemaker, but it tends to be a very logistical driven time to be in the cellar. Whereas January definitely feels a little bit more winemaker involvement, and you can actually start realizing what the wines are going to look like in 12, 18 months time. And so those are the big chunks. And then obviously, I have driven out there for 12 hours before, or flown out there for 12 hours and come back the same day just to sort a few issues out. But now everything's pretty aligned between us and the parent winery, so I have a little bit more freedom, and I could feasibly get away with calling myself a flying winemaker. Is that still a cool term? I think it's a pretty cool term. I'm going for it.
Very cool. Love it. Love it. With all those lovely endangered varieties you work with, are there any outstandings, or the very individual sort of wines?
So I am consuming one right now. This is the catalyst for our indigenous variety program, which is our Moristel 76. And that COVID year that I was talking about, the owners of the parent winery asked us if we fancied working with Moristel. I had never heard of Moristel. I made the same mistake everyone else makes, which is thinking it's Monastrell. It is not.
Yeah, so I thought.
It's a separate entity, separate beast. And in that COVID year, one of the highlights, we weren't allowed, we couldn't go to bars very easily, we couldn't go out very easily. So the cellar became such a hub for us. And we had this great variety on our plate. And they said, look, try and make a wine out of this. And did what every good winemaker did, and made about 37 different versions of that wine to start off with, and fell in love with it because Spain's getting hotter, it's getting drier, it's getting harder to make international variety wines out there. And we were processing Moristel at 12% alcohol, and it was ripe, good phenolic characters, natural structure. And that sparked this roll into what else we can have access to in Somontano that is naturally going to work well in the climate limitations that we have, or the changing climate that we are operating within. So we now have Alcagnon in the whites, which is even smaller production than Moristel. We're working with Macabeo, which is not an indigenous variety, but certainly a great variety that works well in Somontano, that was grubbed up for years in favor of Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, all these varieties that are getting harder and harder to farm. And we're working with Garnacha Blanca. These are things that are really pushing our story forwards and changing our style as winemakers as we look for things that we don't have to work too hard in the vineyard. And the Moristel was the starting point for that.
That's amazing. And on that point, I guess moving on, I've actually got a few here. Ollie, you've got a few, but you just can't have them on the ferry. So we've got the Passatismo Blanco here.
Yep.
And you mentioned that's predominantly Macabeo, isn't it? It's Macabeo based with am I right? Parcels of Chardonnay and parcels of Alcagnon.
That's correct. Yep.
But again, so small batch, slight residual sugar, very small. 0 point something, not big. Alcohol level sort of 11, I think 11.3ish. I think it was round, or just above 11%.
Yeah, 11.5%, something in that ballpark. And this is a real challenging wine to make. Making nuanced white wine, delicate, elegant white wines in the Spanish sunshine is, that's a tough nut to crack. But it's something that we feel we've got access to because of the Alcagnon, because of the size that we can work at. We do skin contact, we do wild ferments, we do all the caveats that modern winemakers want to chuck around. but it's that length and that drive that gives that wine so much precision. And I don't think it's a wine that we will be able to make every vintage, because the standards we're setting for it are much higher than we have for any of our other white wines in terms of that precision. You know, the other wines fit different profiles. This wine is a standalone wine that's got drive and electricity to it.
Yeah, and how many bottles roughly did you create of this?
So we're looking at about 2,000 bottles. So we work in magnitudes. We use a lot of concrete.
Yep.
So everything goes to concrete tanks.
Cool.
So we're in magnitudes of 2,000s, 4,000s, 6,000s, and 8,000s. Those are the jumps we have to make, but they allow us to make wines that have maturation, a developed style without adding any tertiary characteristics to it.
And what I love about this is, I mean, I read up obviously a little bit more about it, and obviously there's the floor yeast maturation as well that you've got in this, but it really gives it that extra body that you're getting through, almost the savory characteristics at the back as well, which is, I think, really unique, and it also makes it very food orientated. I think like it would be beautiful, like marrying with a lot of foods, and it's not, if anyone's picturing this sort of like overripe fruit, it's not, but it's also not very light either. There's something in between, which basically means it's a beautiful carry and marriness that works really well with, I think, a lot of food items. And given the climate that you've got in Spain, not surprisingly, they've made a food. You've made a food wine there as well, but it's beautiful because it's very well structured and it's actually quite complicated. And I know it's meant to be saying complex, but hey, we don't always use the buzzwords out of the WSET. WSET. This is the Andy and Ollie show. This isn't the WSET. No offense to WSET though. But it really has got those lovely savoury notes at the back, which really blend beautifully well. And so it's a beautifully structured wine. And I recommend anybody having a look at that because it's fantastic. I also love the design of your bottles, I might say as well. So that it's all about the labelling as well. And the label is great, Tom. And this, I mean, I'm saying that this is a beautiful wine, but you've had far more complicated and mature people in the industry talk about it. Obviously, Jancis Robinson's tasted this and mentioned it with high regard. It did exceptionally well in the International Wine Challenge in 2023, picked up a bronze in the BCWA as well. You know, these are fantastic wines, which we're tasting here, that you're obviously very passionate about, as you should be, but are taking real elements of detail around to construct them as well. And it's beautiful to see with those indigenous grape varietals, and that's a beautiful starter as we move on.
Oh, well, thank you very much, because that it's, you make these things and you make decisions as winemakers, and you hope that they land in the way that you've constructed them. And we learned with the Moristel that if we were going to move towards discovering the true character that was available from our vineyards, it meant working lighter, it meant working with fresher styles, and it meant trying to develop structure naturally. So we aren't using a lot of oak in our wines. We try very hard to allow the grapes to do the hard work in everything we do, but it takes time, and it's you have to build these things. All my wines are blends. Even the Moristel, which is a single varietal wine, is a blend of different batches of Moristel that we have done certain things with, extended stem contact, extended skin contact, whatever it may be. But there's a line between all of our top tier wines now, which is very much allowing the wine to stand on its own 2 feet. We haven't added much in the cellar other than time and making the right decisions. And that white wine is indicative of everything that we've tried to achieve as winemakers. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, especially at the moment. It's in a really sweet spot because it's had that extra bit of bottle age. And for me, it's a beautiful wine and a beautiful signpost, or whatever you want to call it, of where we're going and where we've come from. I'm very excited about it.
I mean, I think we pick up obviously your passion for the wines. Ollie and I, they're sort of nodding away for those that are just sort of listening into this at a later date. But I think what's fundamental in all your wine structures as well, and all the wines, is there's no recipe. This isn't a recipe wine that you copy and paste and produce year after year. These are designated changes that you make year on year based on vintage, based on climatology, the obviously disease or whatever you might face with each year, so that you complement what has happened within the soils, within the vines. Obviously, a lot of these are aged vines as well as being indigenous. So you're looking at all of those elements each year and saying, look, this year, I think this is best with this blend, or actually, I think we do need a bit more skin contact in those parcels. So let's do that. And so I think what everyone should be listening to, and one of the biggest things that you should take away from this is these are not they're far from recipe things that you've just written down on a piece of back of the old back of a notepad or back of a sort of a piece of paper and gone, right, this is my creation, here it is, and I'm going to keep creating it. You're having to alter and adjust it every single year, which makes it very special on the small batches. And I'm sure that you've probably seen over the 8 years the evolution of those wines and how different they are as well, as you evolved in the winery as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got sort of, there's 2 points I'd like to raise along that. I've worked in commercial wineries in the past, and we were told that we had to make wines to fit a space on the supermarket shelf, because that supermarket was a big customer, and we can't lose that customer, and supermarkets hate change. And so even though they were vintage wines, they were made to try and replicate, here's a bottle from 4 years ago, we need this again. And as much as I understand the business dynamics of that, you do lose some of what makes wine exciting. And for us in the cellar, we're leading into our I suppose if you go marketing speak, you look at USPs and things like that. But the things that make us different are the fact that we're small and we're making things in tiny batches, and we can be responsive to the vintage we're experiencing to make the wines that we believe in. And we try not to cloud our portfolio with too many wines. I always get nervous when a cellar has 5 different Chardonnays, or 3 different Merlots, or it makes me think that they're not in full agreement with all of those wines. We try and make everything have a purpose. And so the wines that make it to our portfolio have gone through the process of, when does this wine sit on our table? And that's our rule book every year. How can we make a Moristel that we want to drink for the next 12 months? How do we improve on last year, or how do we make the most out of this year, rather than, right, so we use 30% stem contact Moristel, that's what we're going to use forevermore, because that's just not going to work. It's just going to be completely different. But we are small, we're tiny, and that's to our benefit, because we can make immediate decisions and sometimes drive each other mad, tasting the same tank 3 times in a day, and it tastes different every time you taste it. You think, what are we doing? We made the right decision. But I think the proof is starting to bear out, and I think we've got a very exciting portfolio. We still have the fundamental house wines which satisfy a very specific brief, and those wines are vintage wines, but they have to be similar to each vintage. Whereas this tier of Paso Proximos and the Pasotismos, they are much more reflective of where they've come from and when they've come from.
And that segues.
That does sound incredible.
Well, I'm sorry, Ollie, but that takes me into Pasotismo Tinto again. Like, unfortunately, you're not experiencing this. So I think what you're gonna have.
Sorry.
Well, it's okay. What you're going to have to do is give us a little bit of review when you come back, and I'm sure Tom would like to hear what your thoughts are on the wines when you get back as well. So the Pasotismo.
I'll get back tomorrow.
There you go. We'll hear from you tomorrow. So are you signing off now?
Yeah, I'll see you later. I'm off.
So the Pasotismo Tinto is a blend of a number of grapes. So predominantly this 2022 was Garnacha around about 30%, Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Moristel, Parelletta, Tempranillo, and Merlot. Parelletta is a new one on me, Tom. So that's something I haven't had before. This one pushing up towards 13.5. So it's a good job I'm playing tennis later, isn't it? I'll be great on the tennis court.
Well, it used to be 15.5. So you can see where we've moved on in the last few years. But this is our biggest seller in Spain of our top tier wines. It's much more traditional in its outlook, but we are trying to move with the times a little bit by adding the other varieties in, things like the Parelletta and Moristel, naturally lower in alcohol, brighter in color, brighter in fruit style. And we started off with a lot of barrel fermentation. The first iteration of Pasotismo Tinto was 2018. And it was 4 varieties in 4 punctions, and fully 100% barrel fermented, and then blended and put into bottle. We are now getting into with the reason we put a schematic diagram on the back is because we couldn't fit everything in if we put it in English and Spanish. So and we were fighting for label space. So we decided to make it accessible to all, but now we almost need a fold-out brochure to stick on the back of them, because we put every date that every grape's picked, every process that goes on, and how it's all made, and that shows the evolution of us as winemakers, the evolution of us of our wine styles. We're still trying to make Paso Tismo Tinto into it's sort of our Reserva reds. You know, it's not got the aging of a classic Spanish Reserva, but it's that extra structure, it's that extra weight, and that's probably what makes it work so well in the Spanish market. But also now it's got that freshness to it, which is coming from those other grapes that are in the blend.
Yeah, absolutely. It jumps out with vibrance but also depth and obviously elongated finish as well. And it's there and it's got body and it carries it. And you've got that tannin sort of not grippy, but just at the back end there, just a very smoothness orientated. But it's definitely vibrant. And the first thing that you get is a lot of violets suddenly sort of jump out in the glass, which is beautiful. And I have to point out on the labels, a certain Jancis Robinson has written about those labels specifically saying, and I quote, "I just love the back labels of these wines." So there we go. That's what we want to see more of. You can't say better than that. But again, what is great, and for those that are listening at home and listening to this on their way to work, etc., wherever you might be, do have a look at the Paso Primero website, because you can find the not just tasting notes, but you can actually find the briefs on the amount of acidity, the pH of the soils, the residual sugar, the alcohol content, the way that they're packaged as well. The amount of information that you get there is fabulous, and it's what I think everyone keeps trying to push towards, but hasn't grasped the actual concept yet. So it's great to see that from you, Tom, as well, that's been sort of grasped. Again, award-winning wine, absolutely love it. Yeah, if I wasn't playing tennis, that was going to be gone in 5 seconds. Instead, I'm just going to have to leave it until I come back from the tennis court, because it won't be long before I lose, and then I can come back. But what I will say as well is that the 2022 vintage was actually quite a difficult one, wasn't it? There was not a great amount. It was high temperatures. I remember 22 was an absolute baker, with not huge amounts of rain in the area as well. So to grab that vibrancy is pretty impressive. Normally you would be thinking, and if I'm not saying that there are lots of producers out there that have, but given we were talking about supermarkets, you get very stewed 2022s from supermarket style wines, because they've been unfortunately overcooked effectively and become a bit more flabby, and therefore immediate drinkers, great, and there's a place for it. But you've managed to capture the vibrancy there as well. Is that because of the way that you've blended it as well, and because those great varietals have added some extra vibrancy and maybe even a little bit of acidity into the wines as well to keep them going?
Well, the big thing is, one of the catalysts for our development has been working with international varieties in the past, where you'd be getting 16% potential alcohol and above, and they'd be unripe.
Yeah,
the drought and the sun and the heat and everything combining together. So the earlier harvests, or the earlier bud burst, the earlier growing season, the extended temperatures, it was just resulting in sugar spikes without the phenolic ripeness. And we were seeing it was getting really hard to make wines with those varieties. It was that it's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't tried it, but that horrible combination of such high sugar content and unripe phenolics is overpoweringly awful. And the only way you can remedy it is by working in the cellar with things that we're not necessarily happy to work with. I'm trying to I don't want to be held up in court with this and say reveal any secrets.
We reserve all the rights on this program, Tom. Don't worry, we've been sued left, right, and centre by all sorts so far.
But it made us think there has to be a solution. If we're going to work within this environment, then we need to look at other avenues. And the Moristel came along at a perfect time to show, look, here is a beautifully ripe red that was hanging the same length as the Cabernet Sauvignons, but still coming in at 11.5% alcohol, but having ripe phenolics and being healthy on the vine. Well, here lies the path, and it's we look like lunatics in Somontano because everyone else is very regimented. Everything is trellised the same way, everything is farmed the same way, and it's, you know, it's big, bold, international varieties, super marketable, super easy for the entry level market. And then, you know, us with our vines, which are, you know, we've just put in a load of new vines with fields that haven't been worked. We haven't worked the land. We've allowed cover crops to take over, and we're instead of grubbing that up, we are hand separating the weeds and planting within the grasses to try to improve the soil structure. And we can only do that with the right varieties. And those local varieties that we're using are dropping the acidity, you know, they're increasing the acidity, dropping the sugar content, allowing us to get more phenolically ripe. And that's the way through. And that's where the slight shift in style of the Passatismo Tinto has come about, where we still have Syrah and Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon in that blend, which give us guts and structure. But we've been able to focus on only the best vineyards we have of those varieties and bring Moristel and bring Passatismo into the mix. And, you know, over the last 3 years, we've set records every year for the amount of days without rain or the average temperature. You know, it's not there haven't been one-offs. 2022 was not a one-off. It was as part of a growing trend. But even in that vintage, because we have the natural acidity from other varieties, because we have the natural vibrancy from other varieties, we bring those into the blend, perhaps more than we were anticipating. I'll be honest. You know, we were leaning on those great. Paralette is a weird one. I find it really difficult to understand in the cellar before it's had 6 months of maturation. It's very high in acid, low in flavor, and then all of a sudden the flavor comes out of nowhere, and it brings loads to the party. But you have to have trust and perseverance, which is really difficult when you're working with a new variety and you just want to know what's going to happen. But that's where that's vibrancy. You know, that's Jamie Goods used that word for us. There's a few people that have picked up on that as a hallmark of our wines, and we are trying to lean into that as much as possible. I think there is a vibrancy to modern Spanish wines. Somontano is not known for being a modern having a modern style of wine, even though it's a young DO. And we want to be the ones that are grabbing hold of what's possible and harnessing that in our wines. But you are the judge, right?
Well, no, absolutely. And so that takes me. I'm gonna taste one more before Ollie. I know he's probably got about 1,000 questions for you, Tom. So be prepared to be peppered, I think. But I've got the Moristel 76 because we were talking about that, and you've got it just there as well. Beautiful. I love the bottle again. Labeling's brilliant. But hand harvested from 47-year-old vines as well. So no less, not people that are sort of, these aren't young vines. These are really expressive vines. 100% Moristel. I love the idea that it's partially foot pressed as well. I'm all for that, Tom. I think that's keeping it interesting. I bet that's
light extraction, very light.
Exactly. 15% stem contact fermentation. You've mentioned the stem contacts. Around about just over 12.5% alcohol. Oh, wow. Pretty expressive in the nose as well. There's a lot going on there. And I haven't had a taste of this beforehand. I've just had it poured just before we started. But really expressive, very bright, almost, I mean, it's a very light orientated sort of ruby red, so very pale. If you're doing WSET, pale ruby, get it in there. Oh, wow. Fruit content is there in abundance. There's lots of it. It's bright. Again, I don't want to use the vibrancy again because we've been there and Jamie's taken that one. But it's quite lively. It's it's very aromatic on the nose, but also on the palate. And I will quote Fiona Beckett because she's far better than me from The Guardian, who says, "Gloriously bright and fruity. This unusual Spanish red from a rare grape varietal is one of the most joyous wines I've tasted this year." I can't say anything different to that. I'm completely in agreement, Fiona. But it's actually wonderfully. It comes across. You're expecting it to be a lot more embedded and deep. It has a beautiful finish, very elongated finish, but it's light enough to be almost has that sort of crisp crunchiness. There's a little bit of subtlety there. I mean, vibrant is the word, unfortunately, but but it's beautifully aromatic as well. There's a lot going on there. What a wonderful grape variety. I mean, that's the first one I've ever had of 100% Moristel, and it won't be the last. I can guarantee that. Also, quick little update for everybody that doesn't know. When we do release this, you'll see there'll be a link there. If you type Andy Ollie in the password on the link, you will basically get the Andy and Ollie case from Paso Primero. Have a look in there. Have a look at the case. I'm going to do it in about 5 minutes, so I don't know why you're not. But just a little update for those that are listening, that will be out there. It'll take you to a page on the Paso Primero website that Tom's wonderfully crafted. Unfortunately, it does have Ollie and I in a very awkward position, looking in the vineyard. It's the old one, Ollie. It's the one where we're sort of crouched down and I'm not sure what we're doing. So even that's worth a look as well. But more importantly, then click on the case and have a look at these wonderful wines. They're incredible, Tom. That's my favorite. If I had to have one. Already, because it's beautiful. It's completely different to what I was expecting as well. I was expecting it to be very overpowering, really needing something. I could have that more than happily before dinner as well as with dinner. You know, it's one of those wines where, and even maybe if you had it slightly turn the temperature down slightly, as in put it in the
well, I pulled mine out of the fridge before I started drinking it for this podcast.
I can see that.
I love the fact that you said crunchy, because that to me it's very crunchy fruit. I love that name, that descriptor for it. I always feel nervous about saying this, because I think some people would think I was damning it with faint praise, but I see it as a bistro wine. I see, I love the fact that in Spain we drink wine with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We don't have to smash the whole bottle, but wine is part of the experience. And I very much think this is a wine that would suit lunch perfectly and drift on into a wonderful lazy afternoon. I think that's where Moristel is at its best. It's light enough, it's fresh enough, but there's enough complexity to it. It's really exciting. It's a wine that changed us as winemakers, definitely, and I'm very excited about it. And not least because the other Moristels on the market tend to have a lot of oak in them, and Moristel sucks the life out of those barrels and loses what I think makes it such an interesting grape. So the reason for the stem contact is so that we don't have to put much of this wine in barrel, if any. We use the concrete tanks to our advantage, use that stem contact to get natural structure, and just let the wine be what it wants to be. And I didn't think I was going to be this sort of winemaker when we started the adventure in Spain, but we have turned into it. So let's go for it.
I likened it slightly to a Cabernet Franc. If I was trying to pick out another grape varietal, just with that sort of brambly crunchiness that you get, maybe a subtle bit of herbaceousness, but it's not hugely herbaceous, but it's just there, that crunchy feeling, which and I love the sort of the Loire Cabernet Francs, and I think they have the same element where I'd be more than happy, especially as the sun's shining, to pop that in the fridge. I know that Europeans drink most red wines with a little bit of subtlety from the fridge and bring it back out again, but definitely, even in the UK climate, it would be a perfect wine drinker for right now. We've got the sunshine out, wonderful. Have it in the fridge slightly, bring it back out, and it's a super wine. Yeah, it's a beautifully constructed wine, but I can still feel it as well. It's still there in the finish, which is fantastic. Ollie, I'm sorry that I've taken all of that and drunk loads of wine.
That's fine.
I can see you sort of salivating in the background. I'm sure you've got
tomorrow,
Tom.
Tomorrow,
what's the wine list
would be a day.
What's the wine list on Brittany Ferries like?
Well, it's a bit hit and miss. It's mostly French wine, so I haven't got anywhere near it. But no, it's nice. But it's
Merlot. I'm guessing Merlot's on the list. Merlot followed by Merlot.
Any more Merlot, your Merlot, yes. And there's some interesting whites. I feel like they've been open for about 3 or 4 months. Won't say anymore. Yeah. But no, so this story is like amazing. It's kind of like going forwards. It's like every winemaker's dream. You want to have that collaboration. You want to be trying indigenous varieties. Do you feel like the sort of wines you're saving, is it a comeback story for those great varieties? Do you feel like you're putting their name back onto the map?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it felt like career suicide to start off with, because we'd gone from very easy listable wines to having to explain to people what they are. But it's part of the change of us as a business has been forced on us by market forces. So we have moved away from entry-level wines because we just can't compete anymore. So the fact that we've got this opportunity to work with things that you have to come to us for is it's a huge opportunity for us as a business. And we're really excited that we can be the ones that are championing them and getting them back in front of people. Because if you do find anything out about Somontano, then it's these are the hallmark grapes. These are the grapes that they started off with. So it's nice to be the winery that people are talking about, and hopefully Somontano will recognise as we're the people bringing them back to the forefront.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. And was there a reason for sort of Solmontano as well, that Tom? I mean, I know that you mentioned that you just fell in love with it, but had you sort of circled that area in general, thinking and knowing of the history behind it, or was it more a case of I just want that aspect in Spain and to grab it?
Well, we did have a plan. It wasn't a very big plan, you know, and it was predicated mostly on me having a GCSE in Spanish and having been there on holiday. You know, it wasn't the exact to the letter plan that most people would have. But we knew that we wanted, you know, we wanted to have a DO because at the time we felt that having a DO was a door opener for people who didn't know who we are or what our story was.
Yeah.
I now feel less inclined to chase DO wines, not necessarily as important, but at the time that was what the decision making process was. And we felt like we didn't have enough money or finances or experience to do Rioja or Priorat, or, you know, it's the bigger hitters of Spain felt like they were unachievable to us.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to look beyond that. And we also wanted to have a bit more freedom in the varieties we could grow, the varieties we could work with, the way we labeled our wines. And suddenly you start putting all these factors in. And Somontano, as the youngest DO in Spain, has the widest, or one of the widest ranges of varieties you can use, has pretty open regulations on labeling. All of those things suggested, right, this is going to be the young, dynamic region for us. When we got there, we realized that it wasn't exactly that. There were big businesses in there and they were making big wines for very little money. And it's perhaps what it's taken us a long time to turn Somontano into what we wanted it to be in the first place. But with our parent winery, that's exactly what we've done. So, you know, we were able to use the fact that Somontano had brilliantly commercial wines to start a business, because it's very difficult for me to come in year one with a Moristel and try and sell that on the market, and, you know, you just get laughed out of town. Whereas we were able to create a business off the back of a Spanish red, which was oak aged Merlot Cabernet Sauvignon, but Tempranillo to give it that sort of Spanish characteristic in inverted commas. You know, we were working with Chardonnay. You know, everyone loves to hate Chardonnay. The Chardonnay's biggest fan, but it makes a commercial wine. And so these things were in place in Somontano, which is what enabled us to take that initial idea and run with it. And then we were just in the right place at the right time to take that one step further and start being those weird hipster dudes around the corner who are planting ridiculous varieties in a ridiculous way.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that makes perfect sense as well. And I think for anyone that's looking at, and I think we're all trying to do this, look at trying to find our own vineyard and make our own wine. It's a great great plan of doing it. I know Ollie happening to come back from Spain as he is now. We thought your boat had sunk a minute ago because you disappeared, Ollie, but we're pleased to tell everyone
Sorry,
he's back.
You missed the best bit.
yeah, I'm back now. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. I'm so sorry. There's a fish and chips on coming to me, and
I mean,
sorry.
This is why we're tip top.
I'm getting told
Tech. This is why we go to 13 or 14 different countries that listen to this, because they know that our jokes are just magic. Unfortunately, they're not. It's actually just the story of our lives. This is real life. And you did miss the best 5-10 minutes of Tom's explanation as well. You missed out why Solmontano and why it was picked. But having said that, Ollie, you're coming back from Spain as well, so you've got some very exciting news. But obviously, we can release that at a later date for why you're coming back from Spain.
Yes, we must.
Tom, what's the what's the next plan or the future of Paso Primero, or where would you like the future of Paso Primero to be going towards? I know
Well,
that you're doing a lot of distribution and tastings and shows and advertising the brand, of course.
the next step is conversely called the next step. It's Paso Proximo. You know, we started the business with Paso Primero, which roughly translates as first step. We've gone on to make this top tier wines, Paso Tismo, which has slightly more dubious naming story. We'll go into that another time. And we've started looking at a new range of wines to add to the portfolio. As I said before, we don't add wines lightly. We don't add them just to hit price points or fill space on the shelves. They've got to have purpose. And we've started working on a range of wines that are only available to us because of the work we've put into making the top tier Paso Tismo wines. And this is a tier below Paso Tismo, perhaps a tier up from the house wines, called Paso Proximo. And they're limited edition at the moment as we try and figure out exactly what the lifespan of them will be. But the red is a blend of the trilogy of indigenous reds for the region. So you've got Garnacha, because that came from Zaragoza before it went to France and got turned into Grenache. We've got Moristel and we've got Paraletta, and those three grapes coming together give us to us that is the Somontano blend. That's the heritage blends. Made in exactly the same way or with the exact same ethos as our other reds. We're doing the same with the whites, playing with Macabeo and Alcañón. And it's us trying to see if there's an option for making these lighter style wines that are, landing at about £15 on the shelf, which is, for a fully organic wine made from indigenous varieties, everything's hand processed, hand harvested. This is a crazy price point, but it's achievable because of the foundations we've laid by chasing the top tier wines. And hopefully over the course of the next 6 months, we will gauge interest. We sold out of the first release in 3 weeks, so I'm pretty confident that the interest is there. But these are the wines that I think will really take us to the next level in terms of them being affordable, approachable, but with huge depth of complexity and intrigue. At the moment, they have a limited edition label, which is a monogram of my face. It does glow in the dark, so they're pretty cool. I struggle to say that my face is cool, but the glow in the dark element is definitely cool. And they're really exciting wines because, like I said, they couldn't exist even just 2 years ago. They're only possible because we are developing as winemakers, and I think that is so exciting. A lot of the bigger chateaus, bigger wineries don't have that room for progression because not to their detriment, they're still making amazing wines, but there's a expectation of what they're doing, whereas we have no rules and we can just keep chasing the next most exciting thing, trying to plant vines for my kids to have to worry about rather than a lot of Somontano vines which are coming up every 20 years. These are legacy varieties for us. These are hopefully going to be legacy wines, and getting them out to the public now is it's going to be a real test to see if everything's been worth it. And that's the next big step for us, I guess, is proving that they are portfolio wines.
Fantastic. Couldn't have said it better, Tom. And I guess more importantly, where can people buy them? Obviously, paso-primero.com on your website, and you can see the wine shop. Is that the best place for everyone to order the batches? Obviously, you're doing tastings, I know, as well across the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I will turn up anywhere you'll let me open a bottle at the moment. We've realized the value of getting out there and telling the story in person. So I will turn up to as much as I can, or as much as I can afford to get to. But the website is the home for everything. If people sign up to the newsletter, there's a fairly consistent outpouring of my daily grievances on the newsletter. That's a great starting point, but we are, we have other customers, but the website is definitely the best place to buy. It gives you a really good insight into what we're up to. It gives you the best case configurations. Like we've mentioned, there's an Andy and Ollie case that was added to the secret hidden page, which there'll be links to everywhere, I'm sure. And that's where I would point everyone for sure.
Perfect. Tom, thank you very much for your time. It's been amazing. I think we could have sat here and spent hours and hours, but I think your kids and your wife, obviously, they don't see enough of you anyway. So I think they might have a slight grievance with us if we kept you for longer. Ollie hasn't sunk, so it's good to see that as well. Ollie, good to see you. Thank you for joining us on the ferry. Tom, thank you very much for joining us and being an amazing guest.
Thank you.
And I really push everyone to get to passo-primero.com to take a look at Tom's story. Take a look at that video as well that I mentioned, which is brilliant on the on his website. But also, then more importantly, Andy and Ollie, you can get your designed case there, and you'll see Ollie's lovely face as well. But thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Cheers.